presentation, The Heat of Life in a Handful of Dust, will hone in on the concept of art being understood as a victory against the harsh realities of living. The project will focus most on trials, streamlines of all the individual narratives that Andrés and Marcia have worked on into a visual record in which all collaborators are depicted as a living memorial, meaning they are enacting and becoming visual testimonies to events that happened in their lives. This record is a tool to enter the collective human experience in which art is used as a celebration within the midst of intense life changes. Marcia and Andrés see each other as collaborators and conspirators. Love that word. Wonderful. Making images, living life, learning, and growing. They are committed to continue this journey together, no matter where they are, where they might be geographically. So, without further ado, please welcome Andrés y Varona and Marcia.
Hi, everyone. My name is Andrés. I'm really glad to be here with you all today to be speaking about the works that I've been making in New Mexico and with Marcia Reifman. And I used to come to SPE when I was an undergraduate student, and I always just felt really inspired from all the talks and the images, and really inspired to make my own work. So if there's anything you can take out of this talk, I hope it's that. I hope it's inspiration and energy. And after the Q&A, we do have prints and things to look at, so please just come by and touch everything, and yeah, we can have a conversation about that further. Okay, so I made my move to New Mexico in November of 2019. Up until that point, I had been focusing on a body of work called Contact, which was about my mother, her death, ritual, and the idea of reconnecting with death. Back then, I thought New Mexico would be a great place for me to continue this exploration, considering the natural elements of the desert, thinking about dryness and aridity as a place for life to also exist. But in the best possible ways, my direction unknowingly changed, and something else entirely gave way. I met Marcia when I was 23 years old, and we met at the El Dorado Library near Santa Fe. I was invited to attend a photo club meeting taking place at this library, and I happened to take a seat next to Marcia. She was 74 at the time. Everybody was probably 40 or even 50 years older than me, but Marcia was different. It felt like I was talking to someone my own age, and even looking at someone my own age with how she dressed. But what really intrigued me about Marcia was her voice. This slow, androgynous, earthy voice. That's what made me want to know more about her. And after talking for a couple of minutes, I knew immediately I wanted to photograph her. A week went by before I invited her to my house, and when we spoke for the first time about making images together. I told Marcia then that I wanted to photograph her mouth, which ended up being something that surprised us both. Marcia told me to call her phone and to let it ring to voicemail. What I heard was a quick, bright, and clear voice. In a way, it was a voice totally opposite to the one she has now. She told me that was her voice, her original voice, prior to losing 3/4 of her tongue and prior to the 66 radiation treatments with chemotherapy. By interpreting these feelings in my own manner and trying to put myself in Marcia's shoes, we began to speak in vulnerable ways we hadn't before, which led us to question who we are to one another and who we are to ourselves, all while making images about it. What does a 13-hour surgery feel like? What is it like to have your voice replaced by one that isn't yours? How does it feel to chew and eat? What do you do with your saliva when your tongue can't guide you to swallow? I dug a hole and Marcia jumped in. The day is bright and sunny, dirt and rocks against her skin and in between her toes. I asked her then to climb out of the hole, but what I really meant to ask was to see herself alive. My work changed when my obsession changed, from my mother and death to life and what it meant to live. This led me to think of conflict and the significance conflict has in our lives, as well as what we do with conflict as people. I often think that without conflict, life ceases to continue. Things like change, illness, addiction, aging, and even certain emotional ambivalences are the kinds of things I mean when I refer to conflict. What do we do when we are confronted with these challenges? How do we treat others in these moments? How do we treat ourselves in these moments? Is there closure? I'm interested in that mode of survival and using art as a way to beat something unchangeable or unbeatable. It was around this time too when the COVID pandemic began and when my mentality started to change, that death to life mentality, and about the kind of work I thought I was going to be making. Although I did not know the kind of work I'd be making at the time, I did know a few things. I knew I wanted a blank, empty space to create images inside of, to literally build environments in and installations in. This is the first thing I tried with Marcia and a few other friends. We were making photographs in this racquetball court at night. It was a public racquetball court, so it wasn't long before the police came and we were told we could no longer use this court, this public court, as our studio. And it was a silly thought, but something about the austere walls and like the blank concreteness is where my mind was going. What really changed things was when Marcia showed me and a few other friends this mock-up made out of popsicle sticks and cloth. It resembled the racquetball court perfectly. She looked at us then and suggested we build it outside on her property with a big smile on her face. And at this point, I was totally freaking out. I was just like, whoa. And I knew for sure then that Marcia was committed to all of this, maybe even more than I was. And it jolted me with such energy. It just felt like everything was full of possibilities. Every day for the next 9 months, I would work outside building this desert studio with Marcia, Aaron, Russell, Ozzy, Alicia, Keith, Sam, and Rodrigo. It's important to note that this was now happening when COVID pandemic was in full swing. So there was a mandated quarantine, everything was closed, and we were receiving stimulus checks to cover our unemployment. In a way, these circumstances created a residency for all of us to do nothing but work on our art and ourselves, and we took advantage of that. So now I began making photographs in this structure, and with the new people entering my life. Since then, the feeling of the structure has become that of a refuge for myself, a shelter activated by the people and the spirit. Yet at the same time, the structure can also feel like an arena where battles and strife rage. It's a space meant to absorb personal histories and energies every time it is used, and felt again the next time when entering, to collect narratives and decompartmentalize those narratives with imagery and within the space. Before I knew it, I found myself working with family again, a chosen kind of family, and a home space similar to that of my first body of work. This was one of our first iterations in which we built 8 panels to act as walls, each panel being 10 by 10 feet. But it wasn't long before the desert winds came rolling in and destroyed days of work and preparation. One day, the entire studio collapsed on me. All walls began to fall down, and I was being buried in the studio, and Marcia had to come and excavate me from the site. So once the panels were destroyed, we built a new skeleton for the refuge that is made out of 4x4s, and it hasn't failed us yet. So that became something to think about. Since my workspace is outdoors year-round, nature isn't something you can go up against. Instead, I had to find ways to work alongside the desert and its elements. One way I began doing that was to only photograph in the morning. I learned that the wind was most calm in the early morning, to the point where you could hardly feel it. As the day goes on and afternoon comes, the wind will be at its full strength. The morning light became my source, and I try my best to make the images within that first glow. I often arrive to the space hours before the sun is supposed to rise and make sure I have everything ready to go. The splintering frames, peeling fabrics, and broken wood not only became a testament to New Mexico's harsh environment, but it also began to reference the wear and tear of the human body, which became a big subject in this body of work. So far, the outcome of this body of work has been about translating our physical and mental conflicts into uncanny visual stories. The idea is to streamline all of our individual life stories into a record of growth and personal triumphs. If we can find that conflict, that friction, or that ambiguity, those life wounds, freeze it into a photograph, then we can begin to mend ourselves. Photography is a visual language, which also makes it a language of metaphor and mystery, just like life. If you don't want to talk about what happened or is happening, then show it. Let it be a visual testimony attributed to your life. The refuge, which is what we call our big desert box, was the space to enter this part of your mind. Here you could bring up experiences, emotions, thoughts, feelings, or things you just don't like to think about or talk about. Here's my friend Ozzy and Marcia's mouth in the corner of the frame. I had them sit facing each other inside the studio space on an early cold morning. In silence, I wrapped metal wire around Ozzy's shaved head, as well as Marcia's face, while the two of them stared into each other. Prior to this idea, Ozzy and Marcia had been butting heads, to put it gently. So this exercise of embodiment was a response to that. They were locked together via these helmets for a few hours. They were talking to each other with their eyes and with the creases forming on their skins. I shaved my head the night before most of my self-portraits in this series. I find there is nothing to hide behind. No clothes, no hair, no shoes. You're open. Now when I look at the photographs of myself, it wouldn't necessarily be me, but perhaps a side of me that not many get to see, including myself. So I did this with Ozzy prior to the shoot, looking for a similar outcome. This is what a cancer radiation mask looks like. And this particular one belonged to a woman named Sharon who died from skin cancer. I discovered her mask while I was working for her husband, Stephen. He explained to me what it was, this plastic mesh construction, and how one mask is an exact replica of someone else's body. Therefore, you can never actually fit into someone else's mask. Upon the plastic mesh, targets and notes are placed so that the radiation can be aimed accurately at the cancer. While that is happening, you are lying flat on a steel table, with this shelling of yourself strapping you down to the table. After it had been explained to me, I began to visualize in my mind what that procedure might look like. It made me think of the mask as a relic, or a testament to someone's fight and desire to live. At first, I questioned whether or not it would be ethical of me to even use these masks. But having learned that most are disregarded in a hospital storage made me think otherwise. In my first project, I worked with my mother's dress also as a relic. The dress served as an outlet to connect flesh and spirit, which I feel the masks do very much, if not even more so. Marcia told me she regretted getting rid of her cancer radiation mask that was used in her treatment. She never thought she would say that, but upon embarking on this project, her thoughts changed. As an experiment and my try for closure, I built Marcia this suit to mimic that body entrapment. It was made with dried bamboo that was harvested from her garden. I took her measurements and cut it to fit her like armor. Though she's afraid of heights, she's standing here on a giant boulder. The air is very still, and she's controlling her balance. As a result of these images, Marcia and I were actually able to acquire masks as donations from people and even hospitals. A fight is draining. In the end, even if you beat your conflict, whatever that may be, you come to a liberation, but one with no winners. The suffering and fear, relief and ordeal, directness and brutality remains. What changes is how you respond to your trials. Two patients, Marcia and Tara, lay facing each other in silence and find mutual understanding through a slow assimilation of emotions. Osmosis. This is another great friend and collaborator, Aaron Garcia. I must talk about him when I talk about the work I've been making. Alongside the refuge space with Marcia, I was also exploring New Mexico with Aaron and making photographs with him. A lot of the feelings I would experience in day-to-day life with Aaron was something I would transmute into the refuge space. I met Aaron Garcia one day outside an Allsup's gas station and convenience store near my home in Santa Fe. I would hang out at this particular Allsup's for hours at a time, multiple days a week, and introduce myself to all the people that came by. I wanted to meet more people like Marcia, someone who I felt was on the same wavelength as me. There was an instant connection between Aaron and I, and before I knew it, we were talking about rocks and feathers, jewelry, ashes, and how intense New Mexico can be. Aaron also asked me what I was doing standing around at the Allsup's and told me he sensed a lack of home within myself. Aaron taught me many things about myself that were kept hidden and brought them to the surface, all while bringing a smile to my face. During our first encounter at Allsup's, I asked Aaron if he wanted to embark on a project with me, and together we started making a visual record of his life, along with his younger brother, Russell Garcia, and other men who lived with Aaron and wanted to participate in sharing a part of themselves, without any fear of shame or judgment. I would visit Aaron every day and learn more about him, which only drew me closer to him. I learned that Aaron's nickname was Pillar. He was given this name for his leadership and protection regarding many travelers, drifters, and people without houses. Aaron cooked for people, provided shelter for many during harsh weather, helped some find work, and brought relief to many through laughter and joy. I remember asking Aaron why he chose to live outside when he had a home in Kiwa Pueblo. And he told me stories of his experiences at a place called Camp Tule in California, where he got to live his native beliefs and traditions in a deeper way. When the retreat was over, Aaron remained dedicated to living in nature, choosing a spiritual victory against the social expectations surrounding living standards. It wasn't long before we were squeezing into my car to go on camping trips, and it wasn't long until Aaron and his brother Russell, who's here on the right, were coming over to Marcia's house. We were all learning about each other, listening to one another, providing a space for each other, and making art about it along the way. But things started to change in 2022. Russell passed away from a respiratory problem overnight, and a year later, in September of 2023, Aaron was murdered. I have been reflecting on the past 3 years I spent with Aaron and Russell, their mother Mary, and other members of his family, as well as the community at the Allsup's near my home. I can speak much more about that, but I'll just say this one thing for time's sake. You're given an opportunity to reaffirm someone's life, as well as your own, every time you ask the question, "How are you doing today?" and really, really mean it. And this is Aaron and I after a photo session in the refuge space. Within the refuge space, when we are working with the idea of visual testimonies, we are also seeing ourselves as a living memorial. How past lives impacted cycles and patterns of survival, or perhaps vice versa. How cycles and patterns of survival impacted past lives. Our bodies are these personal monuments that keep track of our time spent healing, accepting, transforming, or the adverse of that. Our time spent on defense, agitated, upset, jealous. This is poison in, poison out. I've had to ask myself why I am attracted to illness and intensity. I believe my own sense of loss and unfairness has made me want to see other people who have experienced profound loss or that are going through a painful change in themselves. While each image represents a standalone saga in that individual's life, all the images together build a group portrait of empathy and victory. These are cycles of indignation and of healing, and our growth as human beings. It is said that the victors write history. My project, Trials, is an invitation to celebrate the humanity of lesser-known champions. Before I turn the floor over to Marcia, I want to talk about this last picture. As I describe it, this is a self-portrait made by Marcia. I set up the camera and enter my installation. It's early morning light, must be around 35 degrees, and the steel cables are dragging against my bare skin. Marcia is asking me vulnerable questions about my life, about the death of my mother, about my anxiety, about my addiction to smoking, among other addictions, about my fears, and we're conversing. I do my best to feel myself in that moment. I want to reveal something, and because of our synergy and trust, Marcia just knows when and what that is. She watches my mannerisms change and how my engagement with the installation changes in response to her questions. "Stop!" she calls out, moments before hitting the shutter release cable. With that, please welcome Marcia. Thank you.
Now I remember it's like meeting you all over again, watching this. Okay. Yeah, I'm Marcia, and I too say thank you for being here. It's important, probably in our own individual ways, and for me, possibly more than you would, even I know. And my idea of being successful at doing something like this today is if you come away with one word that resonates with you, I've done it. There's only one really hard part, and that is actually talking. So I am committed to being as clear and articulate as possible when I talk, so you can understand me. And I ask you to listen a little more carefully, perhaps, than you would usually to other people. I have this divided basically into 3 parts, and the first part is how it began. And as Andy had said himself, and I wrote it down, when he first came here, he said, since moving to the New Mexico desert, his obsession with death morphed into obsession for life, becoming eager to learn what it truly means to connect with each other. And I thought about that, and my way of seeing it is it's about connection and collaboration. Connection came very easily because we resonated with how and why we made images. And also, which was get to the feeling of them and then make images by exploring materials and other images outside the usual photography venues. Collaboration had a bit of a shakier start. because it meant building a relationship from what had been, up until now, a private creative journey. A big factor in our ability to succeed was COVID. I met Andy right at the moment COVID became widely known. He had just become settled and was finding his place in New Mexico. And then, all of a sudden, he was basically alone. Unlike many COVID stories, ours turned out differently. We spent almost every day making art, building, exploring the meaning of life, traveling, and growing up together in my wonderful home and studio on open land right outside Santa Fe in northern New Mexico. And I just lost my place. So we chose, and were also forced, to build a relationship with each other and our friends based on the fact that the world was quarantined and shut down. We took advantage of every moment and inadvertently built a creative community that just keeps branching out and growing. So now we come to part 2, which is how I tell my story. And what we're going to start off with are slides of actual scans, of X-ray scans of my body, which is what I use, and morph into a little bit of how my life, our life is in New Mexico, to give you an idea. So my story is pretty simple. On September 20th, 2013, I was diagnosed with stage 4 squamous cell carcinoma, otherwise known as really bad cancer. Although I knew something was wrong, doctors repeatedly told me not to worry for 5 years. The last specialist I saw diagnosed me with a probable infection, maybe French mouth, but I thought that was because I cursed all the time. 3 weeks later, I was told by a new doctor that I had stage 4 colon cancer and needed immediate surgery and treatment to survive. On October 10th, I underwent a 13-hour surgery, and from December to February, I was given 66 radiation treatments every day, thrown in with some chemotherapy. Andrew describes it this way, which I really appreciate. Once she started treatment, most of the energy she had withered, along with what she called her life force. Marcia tells me that I met her right at the time in her life when she just started to begin going out again publicly, but was not anywhere near close to how much life she once had. I'm not sure she will ever reach that point, but the life force she has now is more than I experience in most people my own age. Seeing her begin making new work after so many years of not doing so has been one of the most inspiring and strange things to witness, and for me as well. Before my battle with cancer treatment, this is what I did. I stayed in school as much as I could, both as student and educator. I traveled through Europe, went overland to India when you could go overland to India. Worked in small communities all over New Mexico, and served and lived in an 18-foot teepee, built a house, remodeled and landscaped others, dabbled in jewelry making, and among other things, making and baking and sold 40,000 whole wheat donuts. Basically, what I'm saying is that I chose life to choose, let me explore where it would take me. And that led to living very frugally, but also very free. My full battle with cancer and its treatment is relentless, as is the excruciatingly vivid realization that I am exactly who I've always been, except I picked up a few coping skills along the way. And really, the only thing different now, prior to cancer, is my tongue, which is a third of its size. And no matter how old I become, though, I find myself constantly surrounded by vigorous, exciting beings of all ages, and unable to stop keeping making things and thinking. My current desire is expanding community in my own backyard, and you're all invited. And because fortunately, it is 8 acres of exceptional land in northern New Mexico. Almost from birth, my life has been about making things. Maybe that's for being an artist. And as an ongoing desire to figure things in life out and how to solve questions that came with life, depending on a belief that there's always a creative solution. And so I learned and saw that communication was the key, and set out to add this practice that would give me the tools and knowledge to further my life purpose. And that was creating connection with beings and art. So just as we learned photographic and creative skills and practice, I embrace connection as a vital part to the creative process. And that is basically the way Andy and I met and flourished as friends, helpers, and now as collaborators. We are both becoming more confident in how we work together, photographically, and in life. Angie's avid interest in materials certainly has influenced how I started my work again, and the photographic shoots we did awakened visceral feelings in me again that led to me making my own work. And now, part 3. So this part is about work I started a year or so ago. But 3 years ago, I became interested in what all those hands looked like. I hadn't looked at anything before that. And I looked at them and I went, oh wow, these are really weird and beautiful, and I can do something with them. And I started compositing and enhancing them with my magic Photoshop skills, using fabric as my printing material. Then I confronted myself further by making direct photographs of my mouth and then working with them in Photoshop. But that was as far as I got. The spark and force that has always been in me to almost voluntarily become absorbed by my work, it just wasn't there. The skill was there, the mental ability was there, but that was it. So these images in my studio sat there for about a year, not these, but the scans. And I would look at them. Then one day, I had all the pieces out and started putting them together on circular forms. And I realized, of course, I was making cathartic self-portraits of the unexplainable cruelty that sometimes, probably all the time, is part of life. But what was really important is that it happened. In the same way, I always had started my work, being absorbed and just doing it. Then, as I wandered about my house, I picked things up, dirt, hair, wire, feathers, and instinctively started using them in the constructions. Soon, I had a wall full of what others often call mandalas, and I recognized that for me, I lost my place now. Yeah, but to me, what this is a world full of me experiencing the different aspects of pain and grief associated with losing that part of myself. I often work late at night, so at least 2 in the morning, and the next day I come in and I sit there and look at them and have conversations with whoever was there on the work. And I also started collecting more materials I could use for my constructions, recognizing that there's also a beauty in the colors, lines, composition, and look at what I had been doing, as well as an underlying emotional darkness and passion that I was attempting to reveal. I had no interest in other people looking at this stuff, except for the people that would come to my house. But then, one day I had a pool party, and I spontaneously invited everyone to come into my studio and see what I was doing. I knew some of the people, I didn't know some of the people. And it was enlightening to see and hear how they responded, and these are some of the responses. Oh, Marcia, I'm so glad you're doing art again. Is that a saw blade on your face? Those are strands of blue? They're very beautiful. I can't talk about them. They're very uncomfortable. and it resonates with my own stories. I just don't know. Oh, look, you're making mandalas. So now I'm going to show you these individually. And over here, as we said, I also have some prototypes of book project I'm doing, because I also did a huge amount of writing, and to tell, not intentionally, I would wake up and write how I was experiencing my life, and that's in that book. I call it Cancer Tales. And a couple of actual pieces first. I know you want to see how it's made. And now I'm going to just show you some examples and end with that. But before that, I have one more thing. I want you all to take a breath. I will too. And know this is true, that every single one of you is extraordinary. And be sure to come and visit us. That's it.